Hello and welcome to the CFB SuperShow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and my co-host here tonight, Jake Kucheck. As always, it's crazy to think we are at week 15 of the college football season. Conference championships are here, and then the Army and Navy showdown next week. It has been a very fun season. It's like the blink of an eye. When you're having fun, things go fast, as they say, but this is the first season in a long time where I felt like, damn, it's already almost over. Another pretty solid week at the office last week. We had some up and down results. Night slate again went pretty well. Seemed like some solid betting and everything. But the culmination of everything coming up, we still have bowl games, the playoff and everything. But a little bit sad, I got to say, that we're near the end, Jake. I've had a really fun time doing this with you, and you've been really good this year. Another solid week for you last week, it seemed like, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, love being here. Love the opportunity. Talk the games through with you, and the Shador call went okay. I didn't think to double stack him with Weister in there too. The Weister and Hunter combo would have been pretty killer, but even just with him and Hunter and having enough other pieces, it did pretty well for us. And can't say enough about Taj Brooks, man. Taj Brooks and Scattaboo came through big time. It was all over the place. I feel like it was one of the weeks that I felt really good about. A lot of guys in all three positions, and they all kind of hit. So yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, I just saw you nailed the Colorado call. I was light on Colorado. Still did okay because I also had Scattaboo. And then my man Parker Navarro came through in a big way. It was a good week for both of us. Just wish I would have paired those two together and really kind of would have sailed to the next level there. But definitely solid last 3 or 4 weeks. We've done quite well. All right, we're going to get into this conference championship stuff. There is a Friday slate, which there's 3 games there, and then the all-day Saturday slate, starting 9 a.m. Pacific and ends last game at 5 p.m. There are 6 games in all. We like the all-day stuff. Gives people plenty of opportunities to make mistakes. If you're new to the show, welcome. Where have you been? We're going to be going game by game here, giving you our thoughts on everything from a DFS perspective, any betting opportunities, and then finishing up with PrizePicks, Underdog stuff. And then Jake does a end of the show slate breaker call, which was phenomenal last week. And we're going to get to it here. And then we'll be taking a little bit of a break next week. It's just the Army-Navy situation. And then we'll be full bore into the bowl games and the CFP, which controversy, of course, with Alabama bias, putting them in. We'll see what happens here after the SEC championship. But let's get into it. We're going to start with the Friday slate here. Jake's going to tell us about Tulane versus Army. Army has another game next week against Navy, with Tulane's tough loss against Memphis. Doesn't really do the conference any favor. Probably won't have a playoff representative this year. But that's okay. Both teams are going to go to a bowl game anyway. So tell us about this one and break it down.
Well, so first, I'm disappointed we're not doing a 2-hour show on the Army-Navy game. You can really you can get into that one. That one gets fun. So context is key on a 3-game slate. This is more or less the game to stay away from, even though there are pieces to like from this game. It's just we've seen Army's slow and methodical drives all season. Bryson Daly is getting Ashton Jonte-like volume as a runner, as a quarterback, and he's an interesting play. It's not the absolute smash spot that he sometimes has been. Up there at 10-3, he's getting a little bit pricey, but we have seen him put up a 60-point game, and so that ceiling is only attainable by a few people, and he's one of them. The question for me is this the game environment with a Tulane team that is also fairly methodical in their approach? Do we see a lot of back and forth fireworks in this one, or do we see, a 17-14 that, there's like 6 different 8-minute drives that take up pretty much the whole game, and not all of them even end in points, kind of thing. It's an interesting question. We still, we have the decision point with Jonty versus anyone else who's expensive, and Daly is the first version of that decision point. Gets a little easier at the running back spot. I don't want any part of Udo at 5,900. And they actually went away from him last week volume wise and gave 14 carries to Noah Short, who didn't really do a whole heck of a lot. 3 yards a carry. He didn't do himself any favors in terms of making a case for additional volume going forward. Did catch a couple passes for 35 yards as well. So if you're going running back on that side of it, I actually probably would want to go to Short at 4,400, a little bit more than I would want to go to Udo. But I'm not overly excited about either of those pieces. It's just, getting the potential discount on Udo is interesting. And then in the Army passing game, you can't just immediately say no to the Army passing game like we've been able to do in years past. Casey Reynolds has actually gotten decent volume on a relative basis for a team that doesn't throw a lot, and he's only down there at 3,800. Does have 3 touchdowns on the season. 16 catches for 400 yards isn't a ton of volume, but it is good enough to be one of the more interesting receivers on this team for Army. And that's pretty much where it ends. Should probably give a shout to Tyrell Robinson too, who got 5 carries against San Antonio and also 3 catches for 46 yards and a touchdown. And he's min-priced in the running back slot and operates a little bit more as a receiver than a running back, or at least a little bit more as a receiver than the other running backs in the Army backfield. So all of that to say, none of the options on the Army side are must-haves for me, but either Short or Robinson as kind of a last guy in type play is interesting, and I'm leaning, not 100% committed to, but leaning towards a full fade on Daly. Just I don't think that we can get there with the salary and with this game environment and with the other 2 games on this slate being pretty high flying game environments. I don't want to get there with him. On the Tulane side, we've had success with Mensa. He is a much more affordable quarterback at only 5,800. Again, not exactly the game environment that I would want to use him in, but I do think that Tulane's going to have the ability to out-athlete Army quite a bit. So he's an interesting play. Save some money at your quarterback spot and go pay up for some people in some other positions. We've been using Mekhi Hughes all season. He's had a remarkable season. I don't think he gets enough credit. Well, from us he does, but overall in the industry and in the CFB landscape in general, I think he deserves a little bit more credit for how consistent he's been. Averaging over 100 yards a game, 17 touchdowns on the season. Not the best matchup for him, and he was shut down pretty hard against Memphis. But I think he comes back and has a strong performance. I don't know if it is an 8K as a DFS play worthy performance. I don't know that this is the game environment for that either. So kind of comes down to, if you think this does turn into a shootout somehow, absolutely use Daly, use Hughes, use Robinson, pick a Tulane receiver if you like one. I'm not feeling that way about this game. And on the receiver side, we've been using Mario Williams with plenty of success, and that had a lot to do with why we didn't have as much success with Mekhi Hughes, because Mario Williams was just doing it all. 7 catches for 130 yards and touchdown against Memphis. So he's interesting. The other piece, Yulkeith Brown, we've seen him be explosive at times. He's kind of a more hit and miss type piece, as you might expect, given the $4,100 price tag. And then Bauman is kind of the steady as you go, 2 to 3 catches, maybe a touchdown, maybe not, but you're going to probably need that touchdown for him to be relevant, even at the 3,400. And that is pretty much it on the Tulane side. So not forcing any of these pieces. I do like a lot of them individually as a last piece in lineup filler, but I'm probably getting away from the game stack on this one.
Yeah, and a healthy Tyrell Robinson, former quarterback of this Army team, is very intriguing. I like that they got him some additional looks last week. Definitely min price. And then on the Tulane side, a GBP special on 3K, Shaz Preston. He got me a touchdown on Thanksgiving Showdown. Just one catch for three yards and a touchdown, but he's a game breaker, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think I'm in agreement. I love for the betting wise on this one, Army side. At +4.5 seems like a pretty sharp bet. The total's 45.5, but I do like Army in this one. All right, let's move on to our next one here. The CUSA Championship, Western Kentucky versus Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State is a 4.5 point favorite, total of 57.5. These two teams just faced off last week. And it was a 19-17 victory for the Hilltoppers at home. With like 3 seconds left, their redshirt sophomore, like Superman kicker, kicked the winning thing there. Tyler Huff is dealing with an injury issue. That's why the game on this one wasn't particularly high scoring in their last one. It's really hard to beat a team twice, and they played each other extremely tight last week, even with the issues of Huff. So this is definitely going to be a very, very fun game. Starting with the Jacksonville State side, Huff priced at 9.3, a true game time decision, dealing with an ankle issue. Nice thing is, it's the first game on the slate, so we'll have some time there to figure that out. I suspect he'll be doing the warming up thing, and then we'll see. Worst case scenario is not that he'd be out, but that he's available playing, but that he tweaks that ankle, ends up barely playing at all. And if you used him, your night's over. So obviously we want Huff to play. He is an extremely, extremely elite dual threat option. Has thrown over 2,000 yards. 11 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, and then rushed for over 1,100 yards. The offense here and 13 touchdowns on the ground is very, very heavily involved and prevalent in the running game between Tyler Huff and Trey Stewart. Mitrog has done a nice job through the portal. They need Huff, but if he can't go, we do have Logan Smothers, and DK did, the little jokers that they are, price him at 9.1K, which is a little bit tougher to get excited about. But if Huff is ruled out and Smothers is in, I do think he's playable. He has that dual threat upside as well. A couple of weeks ago against New Mexico State, he had a 72-yard rushing touchdown. I did rush for 32 yards last week in a touchdown. The offense, again, it's so big on the quarterback running as well. And Smothers has shown that rushing upside throughout the course of his career, dating back to some P5 stuff when he was around. So the price is high, but if he ends up being the one that starts, you can definitely look in his direction. Gotta love Trey Stewart. If it's between Trey Stewart and Mekhi Hughes and you can only play one, for me, it's got to be Trey Stewart. Made a decent chunk of money from weeks 9 to 11 just betting his multi-touchdown prop. Game against Liberty back in week 10. I believe that was a weekday slate. 232 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was mega chalk, so it didn't really help anything, but he's just an incredible find. Was from a D2 school. I don't know if he has another year of eligibility after this, but if he does, you can rest assured there'll be some P5s coming his way, or I guess P4s now, because he's been incredible. 20-plus carries each and every game. He was a little bit stunted last week. 20 carries for 85 yards. Still over 4 YPC, did score a touchdown, had a couple of receptions. We're used to him getting over 100 yards. The week before that against Sam Houston State, that was a bit of a slog as well. 27 carries for 99 yards. So 2 straight games by his standards that were down. I do think we see him have a lot more success here, especially with Huff having the ankle issue. The concern here is that Huff's not going to be running as much. He hasn't been practicing. They're not trying to overexert him in practice, so he really hasn't practiced at all. And I suspect that we're going to see 25-plus carries for Stewart, if not more, which will equate to 30-plus touches. So definitely a all-in play there for us. We do have the Georgia transfer, Andrew Paul. He hasn't been relevant lately. Did have some nice success with him in the middle part of the season. talents there, plays behind Stewart. They do use him as a bowling ball style goal line, back when they need. So if they get into that area, there is a chance at 3-4, maybe as a GPP look. You're running some multi lineups. Andrew Paul, you could do worse than him for sure. And the wide receiver room for Jack State, it's not as an exciting group. Cam Vaughn does lead the team in targets with 58, 35 catches, 529 yards, 3 touchdowns. The other relevant receiver, Michael Petaway, 24 catches, 429 yards, 3 touchdowns. Again, this is a very heavy rush offense. They're all cheap, kind of like the Army guys. Vaughn at 4.3, Petway at 3.9. I suspect we'll see some ownership in Petway's direction. Whenever they were on the slate, he was definitely kind of a chalkier, low-end value type of play. I don't particularly find myself too excited about any of their receivers on that side, but they are cheap. On the Western Kentucky side, got the news that River Helms is done. He hasn't played since week 8. He was kind of their 4th option anyways, but he will be out for the rest of the season. You have Caden Veltkamp at 7.7K, a very good price. I would expect him to be extremely high owned at a sub 7K price point. He has been under 20 in 3 straight games, but still, just like last week, he threw over 300 yards, only scored the 1 touchdown, and he also fumbled a bunch. It's been kind of a thing that he tends to do. But this is definitely a game in which I would suspect he would throw over 300 yards here, especially if Jacksonville State has Huff and they're running at their peak efficiency. At the running back spot here, 6.2K for Elijah Young as their RB1. Has been getting some more work, at least in the last game, 91 yards, 7 receptions for 78 yards, a lot of PPR action here against Jack State. I would expect him to get a lot of short yardage catches once again. He's had at least 3 receptions in 3 straight games. That 6.2 price point is definitely on the low end for him, and this is one of those situations where you can play the quarterback with the running back because he gets that PPR work. And then as the receivers go, this is where you really want to kind of target, and they're cheap for these guys. Keyshawn Johnson, technically the WR1 at 6.8. That's a agreeable price, but then you have Easton Messer down here, or Messer at 5K. I'm not sure why he's priced at that. He's been around 4.5 to 5K whenever they're on the slate, but he steadily gets 3 to 5 receptions. And as far as the target totals go, he has 65 in the season, which is second best on the team. 45 catches, 642 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So to my money, a big underpriced play there. If you can get to Keyshawn Johnson at 6.8, he has 89 targets, 66 catches, 836 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And then you have Dalvin Smith milling around there as well, 29 catches, 330 yards, and 3 touchdowns. With him healthy, he does do enough to kind of pilfer work, and he is priced at 4.1K. He didn't do a lot against Jack State last week, but in week 13 against Liberty, 463-1. A little bit of a inconsistent option, high variance play. Couldn't sit here and say with any definitivity that he's going to have one of those big games, but when he does, it does hurt Keyshawn Johnson to a degree. And when you're paying up to almost 7K on a slate where we have Ashton Genty, you really need to be able to know for sure that 6.8 price point is going to give you 20 plus fantasy points, especially on this slate. So you've got that value there. I prefer Messer Smith as the GPP look, and then both running backs in this game will be a big priority for me. And then we'll determine what happens here with Huff. Even if Huff plays, it's a tough decision because an ankle injury, if it was, it's funny because it's quarterback, so you're like, an ankle, whatever, if his arm's hurting. With Huff, we want his ankles good. His arm could hurt, and I wouldn't really care because I just need him to run the football anyways or hand it off to Trey Stewart. But with his ankle, that takes away a lot of his explosiveness and what he wants to do. So stay tuned for the injury news there. But both running backs, Easton Messer, and then potentially Caden Veltkamp. We'll see. Like I said, he'll be chalky, but I'm not exactly sure that he's going to put up a big 25 plus score because I think the Gamecocks are going to have the ball a lot running the football. So anything you want to add to that one before we move on to the Mountain West Championship?
I guess the only thing with that, and we don't get to see this very much in college, but these teams just did play each other last week. And so I think from a betting perspective, I think that favors an under. I think, the coaches got to see a lot of the plays that these teams are going to be running, and they might not be as effective the second time around. And they, I think that we see some offenses kind of sputter out of the gate. And then from a DFS perspective, I think that both offensive coordinators are going to try to break tendency a little bit. that might mean a little bit more in the passing game from Jacksonville State than we typically would see. I don't know what that would look like, or if that's going to be successful, but just something to keep in mind there in terms of maybe they air it out a little bit more, knowing that Western Kentucky comes into it expecting a heavy dose of the run.
Yeah, I like the under. I had this one, Jacksonville State -4.5 as a best bet, and the under 57.5. So I'm in agreement there because I kind of thought the ball control, but yeah, maybe they will throw it. That could be interesting. All right, let's move on. We have the NWC Championship, UNLV versus Boise State, another game that is a rematch, not from last week, but from earlier in the season, in a game that was very, very competitive. Boise State 4.5-point favorite. That was what the case was last time, and they did just cover, and another total of 57.5 per DK. Take it away, Ashton Genty. Very expensive once again, as usual. Who do we like here?
Very expensive, but actually down quite a bit, right? We had him up above 13 for 3 weeks in a row, and it's not like he had bad performances. Like, yes, for that price level, he did not pay off his salary by any means, but dude had 37 carries for 226 yards last week. Yeah. Like in no world is that bad. And he only got in the end zone one time. Boo-hoo. He had 226 yards. And yes, Boise's trying to win this game. And I think they will win this game. And they have the best shot of trying to win this game, giving it to Jonte, right? So in addition to that, I think they would really like him to win a Heisman. And this is his last opportunity to put that on the board, or how is it going to work with them getting a bye and the playoff and the Heisman? Does he get one more game before before the Heisman vote? How does that all work out?
Well, the ceremony's on the 14th, so I think this is it because the playoff wouldn't have started yet.
Okay, so yeah. So regardless of the bye. This is the last opportunity for him to like put a stamp on it. And so, yeah, I mean, 250-4, like that seems fair, right? Like that seems totally within his realm of capability. And at 12.5, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and lock him in. At 14, it would be more of a question, but probably would still go ahead and lock him in. Like I don't know how you could like with Daly, I can come up with rational cases and game flow to fade Daly. With Jonte, like, man, it like you're gonna feel bad about not having him when he goes for 250-4. And UNLV will sell out to stop the run, and it won't matter. I think Boise takes care of this one pretty easily. And they get him going, and he is going to be, a force to be reckoned with in this one. And if he's going to score that much, we're going to want a bunch of pieces on the UNLV side. And also, sorry, I should probably just give a passing mention to Cam Camper. Has had 5+ catches in each of the last 3 games, 92 yards, 73 yards, 73 yards. Hasn't seen the end zone since week 6, but that's because all of that has been going to Jonte. So I don't mind also throwing Cam Camper in, even in a Jonte lineup. Like, I don't think you need to have those as independent pieces on a 3-game slate, because there will be times that Boise State does throw just to keep him honest, and it's more likely than not going to be going to Camper. He's had the most volume of late, even though we've seen some Matt Lauder at times, and Latrell Caples take over as the alpha for a week kind of thing. I think it is going to be Camper in this one. On the UNLV side, if you can get to Haj Malik in the same lineup as Jonte, more power to you. That sounds great. He's a very capable runner. He's only been over 100 yards 3 times in the last 6 weeks. So he's gotten there, but he's not the Jalen Milroe type that is going to look to run at all times. They do still like to throw the ball in this offense. So At 9.6, I probably am more interested in him than I am in Daly. Getting both him and Jonte in the same lineup is going to be an interesting call. You might have to use, one or more of those really cheap Army guys in order to make that work. As far as the UNLV running game, Jaden Thomas has been interesting the last few weeks. He's seen more volume. He's been more efficient. Exactly 135 yards in each of the last 2 weeks. Scored a touchdown each of the last 4 weeks. He's not super involved in the passing game. Has no more than 3 catches in any game this season. But at only 5,200 as a run back piece, especially if you're not using Hodge Williams, he's pretty interesting. Even though Boise's been pretty tough against the run, this is a very good UNLV team that can be efficient on the ground. And then as far as Ricky White versus DeJesus, I'm probably going to go DeJesus every time on that one. I think their production has been comparable of late. It has not been like the pepper Ricky White with 14 targets that we've seen kind of in years past type of offense. And even earlier this season, it's been a lot more even distribution. And you get a 50% discount on DeJesus for a guy that has had, 6+ catches in 2 of the last 3 weeks. Definitely not as much on the touchdowns, only 2, and they were both in the first game of the season against Houston. So you know what you're getting into. You're getting a volume possession receiver that hasn't scored since the first game of the season. But you know what? What better way to turn it around than bookend it with scoring twice in this one? So I do prefer DeJesus. If you have the salary and can get up to White, certainly use him. But I prefer DeJesus. And then we've also seen the tight end balling guy get involved, scored a touchdown each of the last 4 games 4 of the last 5 games that he's played in. So at 3,100, that is another cheap piece that you can use to offset some of that salary that you're allocating to Jonte and potentially Williams.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. On a 3-game slate, I'm never fading Genty, even if he was priced at 15K, to be honest, because those raw points just come into effect way too much on those shorter slates. And yeah, I think we got enough value here to make it work with him. I'm going Trey Stewart. I don't sound like maybe we're iffy there. And then at quarterback, yeah, we can get at least one of, Hodge. I know Veltkamp is going to be a big one. So, yeah, there's some pretty decent looking lineups here. And if the industry is going heavy towards that one, then we have some good leverage opportunities here. All right, let's move over to the 6-gamer for Saturday, the big Saturday kickoff, 50K to first tournament going on there. We start with the MAC championship between Ohio, the Bobcats, and Miami of Ohio, the Red Hawks. These 2 teams faced each other once earlier this season. It was a 30-20 win for Miami of Ohio. Parker Navarro was horrible in that one. He threw 2 interceptions, got benched for Nick Poulos, who didn't have much more success than that. I do not anticipate him to be struggling in this one, though. The total, let's see here, it's -2 for the Red Hawks, total 44, so relatively low total there. In a dome, so we've got that going for us in some of these weather situations like an Army and ASU. But Navarro is priced at 8.5. I'm going to try not to have too much recency bias here because he was like just a stone cold killer, but against a Ball State team that can't stop anyone last week. But he's priced at only 8.5. And to me, at this point, as an elite dual threat quarterback, he should be priced a lot higher than that. And there is a ton of other options on this slate that are viable. If I get an inkling here of the ownership again being sub 20% on Parker once more, I don't know how I would possibly get away from him. He doesn't need to throw the football to be too terribly successful, although he did complete 7 of 11 against Ball State for 3 touchdowns. And it's crazy to think he completed 7 passes and put up that kind of score. And his number 1, Coleman Owen, had a absolute monster game on only 5 catches for 142 and 2 touchdowns, but only 7 completions. So obviously they're going to need to do more than that against Miami of Ohio, but it starts with Navarro for me. We did see a ton of chalk on Anthony Tyus last week. I think that could be the case again. He is priced at only 5.8. He's going to get that volume, right? In a close game like this, we probably see him get 15 plus touches. He was also pretty terrible against Miami, Ohio, but everyone was. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at that a little bit too closely, and it's going to, kind of cause them to fade this game maybe when they shouldn't, at least on the Ohio side. As far as the receivers go, because that passing volume is so concentrated, the only one to really look at is Coleman Owen at 7.1K. Yeah, 5 for 142 and 2. Did a lot of his damage early on. Played Navarro naked myself, but obviously I was kicking myself like, damn it, why didn't I play Owen in that lineup as well? But yeah, that's the pairing there, obviously. On the Miami of Ohio side, the Red Hawks, they are championed by Brett Gabbert, who has been around for a very long time, priced at only 6K. The Ohio defense is semi-elite. The Miami, Ohio defense has also been semi-elite, so it's going to definitely be a physical battle here. Even though Gabbert is really, really cheap, I don't think he is a very good play overall. I think we're talking about a guy who may get to 20, and if he did, that would certainly be an acceptable score here, but I think we want a little bit more. And I think more often than not, he's giving us 15 or less in this one. Running back, much more interesting with Keon Mozzie, who is priced at only 4.5. A clear misprice, however. The matchup is atrocious as the defensive efficiency on the ground for Ohio has been very good. They have relinquished less than 80 yards per game on the ground. However, he did light them up for 111 yards on 16 carries. So the 4 or 5 price point is just going to be really hard to get away from regardless of matchup. This is one of those times where everybody who says matchup doesn't matter is wrong, in my opinion, but this is one of those spots where it truly doesn't matter because that price is too cheap. 15 plus touches, he's going to get a touchdown most likely. And then you have the receiver trio, which Cade McDonald started out the season on fire, the go-to guy, and then he was banged up for weeks, and that allowed Reggie Virgil and Javon Tracy to really kind of claim part of this target share here and become the guys. McDonald did come back in week 14 against Bowling Green, and that was a play, winning you're into the MAC championship, losing you're out. They did beat Bowling Green. Injuries to all their key players, and Cade McDonald had 9 for 82 and a touchdown. Coming back, he's at 4.5K. There is going to be a, it might seem like a slam dunk play, and maybe it is, but there's going to be some variance here with the touchdowns because Virgil and Tracy have really stepped up in his absence. Virgil, once again, 6 for 82 and a touchdown. It seems like he's caught a touchdown like every week forever. I think the last time he didn't catch a touchdown was back in week 6 at this point. And then Javon Tracy, who's the most expensive at 5.5, also 391 and a touchdown. He's been very, very consistent as well. With a production that we think probably will be very similar between 12 to 20 fantasy points, it would just make sense to take the cheapest guy in McDonald or Virgil. I think Tracy ends up being the guy who's the lower owned of the three, and that gives us some GPP separation because if he's the one that goes 6 for 150 and 2, which is very, very possible, he's going to be the one that you want to play, and that's going to win you the GPPs. But also, that defense of Ohio is going to be very, very stunted. There's a lot of great fantasy options on this one, but when you consider how the pace of the game is expected to play out, the low total, and how good these teams defensively are, it becomes a lot less exciting than it probably would be normally. But it is the MAC, and MAC craziness has been a little on the low side this year. I can't recall a ton of like marquee MAC moments where like that's the MAC, and maybe this is the game where they deliver that for us. But yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to Parker Navarro. Looking at the rest of the slate, there are plenty of other options to use, but I play my guys, so we'll see how it works out. Let's move on here. This is an exciting one. Who would have thought, man? Big 12 championship game between Iowa State and Arizona State. Arizona State was picked up, I think, like second to last, right around 15th. They're, in position here to win the conference championship. 1.5 point favorites against Iowa State, who won 10 games, cashed that ticket over 8.5 or over 7.5 actually, and a total of 49.5. Arizona State, can they finish this dream season off against the Cyclones? What do we got?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, man. Body clock game for Arizona State, playing this one at 9 a.m. Pacific time for their body clock. It's gonna be a little bit rough, especially the way they tend to party a little bit at Arizona State. I don't think they're used to being up that early. So what I'll say about this is I am so sad that we lost Jordan Tyson. Like this was just such an opportunity for him to put yet another exclamation point on what has been like the fact that he's done what he's done is amazing enough in and of itself. But the fact that he's done what he's done with Scadaboo getting as much volume and their focus when they get inside the 15-yard line, basically just, hey, we're gonna do things with Scat until he scores. Jordan Tyson basically has to score from like 30 yards out to guarantee himself a touchdown. It's the Varsity Blues thing. And so I'm so sad that we lost him. He would have been a great play in this
we're like proud, real quick. We're like proud parents because all the way back at his freshman season, Colorado, you might remember
the Colorado game. I remember that game. Yeah,
we were using him as a value when nobody knew who he was, and now he's like this big stud. So a proud moment for us.
Yeah, but doesn't mean that there aren't other places that we can go in the Arizona passing game. I guess I should just say, like, if you can afford Scat, use Scat. He's 10-3, but he gets, and it's not even that he gets the Genty volume. It's that they just do not do anything else when they get close to the goal line. And he also is like phenomenally efficient too. Like it's not like they run him 4 times and he gets in the 3rd time or something. They line him up, no quarterback, just let him do his thing. He picks a hole and he scores pretty much every time. It's amazing. 19 touchdowns on the season, and obviously involved in the passing game. He throws some passes at times. If you can get to him, he's probably the play I have the most confidence in, in terms of his floor. He won't give you a donut. And he also, extremely tough kid, gets hurt just about every game because of how physical of a runner he is and never comes out. He'll come out for a play and he'll be back out there. So you're not like going to have that thing where, well, oh man, Kyson Brown is in for this whole drive. What's going on here? Did Scat get hurt? You almost never feel that way because he's just tough as nails. That said, he's really expensive and we need to find some value too. So if you can get there, use Scat. If not, passing game is viable. Seen Sam Levitt kind of come into his own, mainly throwing to Jordan Tyson. We'll probably see, a lot more underneath looks. So it's gonna feature Scat to a degree, but we're also going to see a decent amount of Xavier Guillory, I would imagine, in this one. He hasn't had more than 2 catches in all but 1 game this season because of how explosive Tyson has been. But he had scored a touchdown each of the last 2 games. Scored the one against Arizona after Tyson left, and so thought is he may be featured a little bit more. He is only 3,200. It makes for an interesting play, especially this Iowa State game last week. Jace Brown, another brand favorite, didn't get it done with the volume. He got it done with the efficiency. 3 for 106 and 2. If we got 3 for 106 and 2 from Xavier Guillory at 3,200, Walt, I think we're doing pretty well. So I don't know that we can expect that, but he is going to have a lot more opportunity. Shimon Mateer has been pretty much a touchdown dependent option his entire career, both here and at Cincinnati. But he is also only 3,100, so that is okay. We can go to him potentially as well. And then Melquan Stovall. How long has Melquan Stovall been playing college football? Is he been out Bowman?
At least 6 years.
But he, again, with Tyson being out, might see a little bit more of him featured in the passing game. So I like all of those pieces. Comes down to roster construction. If you have the salary, obviously get up to scat. If not, the receivers are very, very cheap, and Levitt at 73 is affordable as well. On the Iowa State side, I've been, as I think maybe I'm not the only one who's been frustrated by the running game, and as we somewhat projected, Abu Sama had the best game of the triumvirate against Kansas State, relinquishing his role as the Kansas State killer. Really, I mean, he 15 for 81 carries, no touchdowns. Wasn't really a big game, but it was the best of the three. And, he had that big game against Kansas State in the snow last year. So it's that same problem with Iowa State. Sama's down there at 3,500. If he got 15 carries again, you'd be crazy to not use a guy that you knew was going to get 15 carries. He could get 5 carries. He could get 20. I have no idea. Carson Hansen was almost as involved last week. 13 carries, only had 58 yards. Jalen Jackson, 4 carries. Sure. Yeah. I don't know. Pick one. I would say Sama is like, I'm, 5% more interested in Sama than I am in Hansen, but I'm not falling all over myself to get either of them in there. You got to talk about Rocco Becht for a minute, because I've been on him all year, and I've, especially when he was like 6K for 5 weeks in a row, is like, how do you not use Rocco Becht as much as he has the rushing ability and he has Higgins and Noel to throw to? He's been a consistent, 25 to 30 fantasy point kind of guy. He was bad last week against Kansas State. 13 of 35. That is less than 50%, folks. That's not what you want to do as a quarterback against a team that you can generally pass pretty well against. Arizona State, hopefully a little bit softer of a matchup for him. Not the most attackable matchup. I thought that the Fafita T-Mac connection was going to go ham against Arizona State, and that couldn't have been more wrong. Arizona State got blown out of the water. Didn't have a lot of time to throw the ball. Offensive line didn't really show up for Arizona State, or for Arizona rather. I think we do get a little bit more protection for Becht at 7,600. He is interesting. Not forcing him by any means. I do want to get to Higgins. I think that this is, we had a little bit of a disappointment. Only 3 for 53 and a touchdown for Higgins against Kansas State. Probably, was a function of how much Becht was struggling. But he's, the guy that Becht kind of locks onto. He 9 for 155 and a touchdown the week before against Utah, which is, as tough of a defense as there is, especially in Big 12 play. So I think he's one of my favorite receivers on the slate. Obviously, he's expensive, but it's a guy that you definitely are going to get volume from. And if you can't quite fit him in, Noel at 6,500 is a very good alternative. They both have been getting enough volume for them to be very interesting. And I think this game does have a lot of back and forth potential. So really like all of the pieces individually, other than not wanting to have to force myself to choose an Iowa State running back. But Levitt, Scat, any of the Arizona State pass catchers, and then Rocco and either of his 2 primary pass catchers, all of that's great. If you really want to force me to pick Sama, and I need to save the salary, he's in the flex spot or whatever, sure. Sama at 35 is of interest, but not something I'm prioritizing.
Certainly not. I think the the Iowa State running back situation is just a horrible thing to have to deal with. But multi-entering, maybe we can cycle through here, because we think Sama and Hansen, and that's when Jackson will get like 20 carries randomly. All right, next one here is the Sun Belt Championship between the unlikely teams, man. I thought Texas State, James Madison, like, well, those were the locks, but we're getting Marshall versus Louisiana. Total of 57.5. Definitely should see some points here. Louisiana is a 5.5-point favorite. Seemed very unlikely that Marshall would be here, but they are here. Quick rundown on them. Quarterback Braylon Braxton at 7.1K. Definitely a favorable price. He has a dual threat for sure. Has rushed for about almost 550 yards, 4 touchdowns, thrown for about 1,400, but very efficient. 17 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions. That has been a very welcome sight for a quarterback historically that has had some struggles in that regard. Going up against Louisiana, they are a defense that is fairly strong against the passing game. Not as much against the run, though, and perhaps it's Braxton that can maybe deliver us with a little of that Parker Navarro action there at a more affordable price. Because the rush defense of Louisiana is kind of suspect, we definitely want to look to the running game of Marshall. However, because Braxton is a dual threat, it takes time away from others, but they also run 3 different players: AJ Turner, Jordan Houston, you may remember that name from before, and Ethan Payne. So you've got kind of a 3-headed monster there. Turner's definitely the more efficient of the group, 104 carries, 864 yards, 6 touchdowns. Houston's been more of the short yardage situations, 93 carries, 473 yards, and a touchdown. And then Ethan Payne, 56 carries, 275 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So Payne's been a bona fide touchdown scorer, especially in the last 5 games where he's scored 4. But you're not getting a lot of carries from him, 4, 6, 3. So he's really just kind of the guy that's operating in that old Coastal Carolina role. Remember using Coastal Carolina running backs over the years? You'd roster the one, and then the other one would be the one scoring the touchdowns. And Payne's just that guy that you really can't roster, but at 3K in GBPs, maybe he scores once or twice on those 4 carries. Jordan Houston has experience in P4. He's also getting somewhere between 6 to 10 carries, so he has to be efficient. He's very much a factor in the passing game, though. At 3-4, I definitely think he's kind of interesting. And then Turner's getting more of the 10 to 15 touches, not as much of a pass catcher as Houston, and he's priced at 5.5. So, again, it's a great matchup, but I don't have any confidence in any of those running backs, and I feel like the 5.5 price of Turner, it's going to look one of 2 ways on the end of this slate. Wow, I only paid 5.5 for a guy who rushed for 103, or man, I paid 5.5 for a guy who rushed for 10 yards, caught no passes, and gave me no touchdowns. So not a lot of middle ground there for Turner. I think we need a Marshall piece, but I'm not sure where it's going to come quite yet. The receiving room is led by Christian Fitzpatrick, but I think he's a little overpriced at 5.6. He's just basically a 1 to 3 catch guy. I think the most upside here is going to come from Toby Payne, who's priced at 3.4. Started the season off relatively strong after week 3, has kind of settled down from there, but he's got high touchdown upside as well. So a lot of these guys have just had to remain efficient. There's not a lot of volume coming from Braxton or this Marshall team. They are just way too deep at both the receiver and running back position. They also have the Middle Tennessee transfer, Elijah Metcalf, who's been out since week 6. He was very productive at Middle 10. If he were to come back, I think he'd be a great play for this one, but I don't know that we're going to get that information here in time to do much with it. The Louisiana side, it's no Ben Woolbridge. He's out, collarbone busted, so he's not going to be back in time. Means we'll be rolling with Chandler Ball at 6.8K. He doesn't have the most appealing logs, and I think that'll probably turn some people off, but I think that he's a pretty damn strong play in this matchup against Marshall, who also is fairly bad defensively against the ground game. Fields does have a 300-yard game to his name against Troy, so he has that upside, but he also has a little bit of rushing upside as well. Hasn't been on full display because he really didn't play much after week 2. It's only after the collarbone issue and the breakage there for the starter that he's had to come in. But he's gotten decent volume. He's run the football effectively, and he's been scoring touchdowns. And again, I think this Marshall matchup sets up pretty well for him. So I think he's a little bit of a sneakier look there. And then the running back room for Louisiana is all cheap, sub 5K. Bill Davis there at 4.9. They were on the slate, a weekday slate against Texas State back in week 10. He was a really good-looking play. He ended up having 7 carries for 11 yards, was awful. And then he proceeded to have 4 strong games out of his last 5 with at least 15 fantasy points. Has gotten no less than 16 carries in any of the last 3 games. Very heavy touchdown guy when they get into the red zone goal line area. More often than not, it's going to Bill Davis. Doesn't have the yardage that you'd like to see, lack of 100-yard games, but it's 4.9, not 7.9. So we can get away with 60 to 70 yards and multiple touchdowns from him at that price point. We also have Zylan Perry, who's priced even lower at 3.6. He rushed for 150 yards in their last game. I don't know if that can continue. Maybe. He's only received 8 carries at the most in his last 5 prior to that. Early in the season, he had a 100-yard game against Kennesaw State, but he was operating as more of the 1B to Davis's 1A. Against Wake Forest, he had 11 carries for 78 yards, and then he's just basically rattled off 3, 8, 8, 3. They've been in a lot of games where they've had to throw, so perhaps a game script issue. Admittedly, haven't watched a ton of Louisiana games this year, only 2. But looking back in the research, it does look like this is a very high variance play that I think people are going to be married to at the 3.6 price. And at 4.9, Bill Davis seems like a little bit of a safer option there. But we'll see how that works out. They're definitely both going to be involved. And this rush defense, again, of Marshall is very much on the weak side. And in the past years, Braylon Washington had been a very good option. Cheap guy, has shown major upside. He didn't even get any carries in their last game. So obviously not really looking to him. The cheap receivers to look at here, the target leader, Lance Legendre, leads the team in targets with 61, 44 catches for 730 yards and 6 touchdowns. Terrence Carter, their tight end, 58 targets, 48 catches for 691 and 4. And then lastly, Harvey Broussard as the WR2, 46 targets, 27 catches, 406 yards, and 3 touchdowns. All of those guys cheap. Carter is a pretty solid high floor play at 4.1. Typical tight end, going to get those 3 to 5 catches for you, maybe a touchdown, maybe not, but he's definitely the safer of the group. And then up to 4.5 for Legendre, who has more of the big playability. He's got catches of 44, 37, and 50 this year. Definitely hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns lately, but early in the season, he was a machine, and he has been getting at least 5+ targets in each of his last 4 games. So definitely the guy to look at there as a passer. I just look at this and see Texas, Georgia, Clemson, SMU, Penn State, Oregon. Obviously the ASU guys you just talked about. Like, I don't know that people are going to look at the MAC. I don't know if people are going to look at the Sun Belt, and my natural leverage contrarian side is just like, boop, 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 boop. What can we do here? But I do think this game could potentially have 2 pieces come out that are optimal. Looking at the running back situation for both, but I don't mind either quarterback as well. You have anything you want to add to the Sun Belt before we move on?
A little bit of a disappointment in Braxton. Was on him last week against James Madison. Thought it was an absolute smash spot for him, and didn't get the rushing efficiency that we've kind of seen from him at times. Was kind of counting on that. He got the volume, 17 carries, but did not get the rushing efficiency that would have taken us to the promised land on that one. And that game overall kind of disappointed. I was feeling pretty good about that one, and not a lot of the pieces got there. But I think it's a good opportunity for him to bounce back in this one, and hopefully, like you said, at a little bit low ownership with a lot of eyeballs on some marquee names, especially at the quarterback position.
Yeah, it was a welcome surprise to have that game on the DK, the night slate, and even went extra periods, right? And still, like, most of the pieces in that game underwhelmed, like you said. I had Knight, not Wayne Knight either, and that was a real sad game for me. All right, let's move on here to what do we got? Georgia versus Texas, the SEC championship, 49.5 total. Texas 3-point favorites. Hate to say it, but I do think Texas wins. What do you got for us?
Well, yeah. I mean, you think of Georgia and you think of a team that is a formidable defense that can control the line of scrimmage and control the clock. And then you see Haynes King just go absolutely bonkers against, what is, by all accounts, probably a better team. And that defense didn't show up at all. And now you have a much more talented Texas team that didn't go to 9 overtimes or whatever it was in the previous week. And I think that the creativity that Texas has on offense, the physical advantages that Texas has on defense, I think that this one becomes pretty one-sided pretty quickly for Texas. Obviously, the spread doesn't indicate that. Everybody. This is the marquee of marquee matchups, right? And potential national championship preview and all that. I think Texas takes this one pretty easily. So, not surprisingly, I'm going to be on some Texas players. I don't necessarily know that one of them is going to be a quarterback. They're doing the bring Arch in at the goal line thing, and that's never fun if you have yours, right? You don't want to get him all the way down the field and get to like the 10 and Arch comes in. And well, there go your chances of scoring a touchdown with yours. And there's other quarterbacks that I like more that are cheaper. So it's not entirely that, but it is partially that. We've been kind of down on Texas running backs so far this season, mainly because there's just a lot of diversity in that running room, and it's hard to pick one. I think this is a place that we could be on a Texas running back. I think that Wisner has a really good chance, especially if he had 33 carries, and he's only 6,300. He had 33 carries last week, and he is facing a defense that is, call it what it is, they're going to be flat out tired. They played a ton of football, and it was extremely physical football all game. And now they're going to play an even more physical team. I think that Wisner is going to have his way with this Georgia defense. And even if he doesn't get to 30 plus, even if he gets 25 carries, I think we get to 102 pretty quickly. And that's the one thing that's kept Wisner from having like a crazy 40-point game, is he doesn't get those multiple touchdown games for whatever reason. Those happen in the passing game, or another back runs it in, or Arch runs it in. I think we do finally get there in this one. So 25, 102 at 6'3", that'll play all day long. If you think I'm wrong about that, if you think that it's Jaden Blue game for some reason, okay, get a little bit of a discount there. But I think it's mainly going to be Wisner in this one. And then as far as the receivers go, Bond is the most expensive, but Golden has been the most productive as of late. Only 3 catches for 73 yards against A&M, but previous to that, 7 catches for 86 yards. And 2 games before that, he had 2 touchdowns in each of those. So he's been involved one way or another for your fantasy production. He's not a guy I'd feel super confident on taking like a catches over or even a yardage over, but like a fantasy score over on like the PrizePicks, or especially at 4,100 playing him in DFS. I like Golden quite a bit too. And I like this game enough to say it would be just fine to use both Wisner and Golden in the same lineup. I'm sure that's a question we'll get at some point. And yes, they are both inexpensive enough in good enough roles that we can certainly do that. On the Georgia side, I actually did use Carson Beck last week, and I never do that, but it worked out because that game was as wild as it was. Won't be going back to the Carson Beck well here. I think this is, as mentioned, a game that they get steamrolled in. I think Carson Beck gets flattened. Maybe you don't want to wish injury on anybody, but he's certainly going to take some hits, and so it's going to be tough for him. May get ETN back, probably doesn't matter. Probably means you don't use Frazier. I think what it may mean, if we see Texas go up like 17-0 in the second quarter or something like that, we may see a lot of passes out of the backfield to Cash Jones. And they were doing a lot of that against Georgia Tech. He ended up with not many rushing yards, only 2 rushing yards, but 4 catches for 53 yards. And he was essentially the third down back with Etienne out and Frazier as the lead back. And I think if they end up in a lot of passing situations, which would track with the way I think this game is going to go, Cash Jones at 3,500 is a very interesting play. He's at least as viable as any of the more traditional pass catchers on the Georgia side. Arian Smith was pretty much the only guy that didn't have a big game against Tech. And not for lack of trying. He had 3 or 4 drops, 2 of them in the end zone. Very rough day for him overall. Dom Lovett showed up, showed out, 5 catches, 47 yards, 2 touchdowns. Not crazy volume, but got the touchdown variance to go his way. The other receivers, London Humphreys showed up. He got a touchdown. Lawson Lucky, he got involved. Everybody's involved to a degree. So if you want to take a cheapy Georgia receiver, or if you want to take a Cash Jones, I certainly wouldn't say no to that, just because they do get everybody involved, but not taking any of the main pieces from the Georgia side. And I think Wisner and Golden are the 2 I'm most focused on the Texas side.
Yeah, we have been, just real quick, super efficient ourselves fading Texas chalk. Like all season long, we have just been so clutch. But I think the first time, it took 15 weeks to be the first time to look at a Texas running back that's likely going to be chalk and say, you know what, I think this is the time we can actually play him. If that volume hadn't been the way it is, like if he had put up 186 on like 12 carries, I would have been like, I think we can fade him again. But yeah, when I'm sitting there looking at 33 and 26 carries, and even 17 like plus carries over the last 4 of his last 5, it's very clear now that they're using him in a way, and he's emerged. As much as I like Jarrett Gibson, it's not his time yet, and Blue is just, it's kind of more that complementary piece. So I am in agreement that this is the Texas chalk running back week that we actually have to play him. It'll be funny because he'll probably bust, but yeah, I don't know how we can get away from him. And I love that Cash Jones call. That dude is real fun to watch. They use him as a receiver all season long, and yeah, it could be clutch. All right, moving on to the ACC title game between Clemson and SMU. Miami just, couldn't get out of their own way and cash that ticket for me. How dare they? 2-point spread in favor of SMU, total of 55.5. We've seen both of these teams a lot this year. Good on SMU, first year in the ACC, ASU's first year in the Big 12, like these teams that are just producing in their new conferences. Clemson, defensively, they've looked better than they are. I've been saying this a lot lately. Their schedule is pretty easy, but I think this is a defense that can definitely, get beat up on. They're giving up over 150 yards on the ground, over 210 yards through the air, but they're against better offenses like this, they're definitely going to struggle and have. The SMU defense, they've been nails against the run, but they've been very, very putrid, mediocre, below average against the pass. So this is definitely a game where very obvious to look at Rashad Smith, who's priced fairly at 8-2. The volume's going to be there. He catches passes. We're somewhere between the two. There's going to be 25 plus touches at 8-2. I think that's a really great look for him there. Very, very high on him. Quarterbacks wise, Kevin Jennings is back to this cheap price. Last time we talked about SMU, it was like, well, it was a couple weeks ago at Virginia, I think it was, when he was like 7-9. You've been writing him up pretty much every night slate, and as you should. And now he's back under that 7K threshold, and we're right back to where maybe we need to start using him again. Pretty solid floor of around 22, 24 fantasy points. I think he can do, even more than that, especially if he gets some of the groundwork that we've seen him do in the past. Not as much recently because he hasn't had to, especially in the last 2 games, but we definitely know he has that upside. So he's a great play at 6-9 as well. The receiver spot for SMU, it's been chalk Roddy Daniels week for like the past 3. he's given us 10 to 11 fantasy points, 6 catches for 42 yards. He hasn't been getting the carries quite as much as we had hoped. And we've seen Jaheim Hudson do some really big things. Now he was in the concussion protocol, but he did end up playing, didn't do particularly well. We'll see what ends up happening there. 4-4. The most playable to me is probably Keyshawn Smith. To me at this point, he's the last man standing with as a dynamic type player, has big play upside, could score a long touchdown, does get carries occasionally, but he's the one that I think if people are going to keep going to Roddy Daniels, and I'm not so sure they will, Keyshawn Smith to me seems like the one that you are the most likely to want to pair with Kevin Jennings and get your, juice that way. It's still crazy the fact that they've lost 3 receivers this year and they still have this mega deep room. You still have Moochie Dixon, who feels like he's been in college forever. And then I got to say, Matthew Hibner deserves attention at 3.5. Over the last 3 games, 3 for 108 and a touchdown, 3 for 35 and a touchdown, 5 for 48 and a touchdown. So Jennings looking his way. Hibner is certainly, worth a main team look potentially at 3.5K, giving you some of that value you need to open some things up here. On the Clemson side, because this SMU offense is susceptible against the pass, it does put Cade Klubnik in play, but he is, admittedly expensive at 9K. We've had our moments with him throughout the season. I haven't been using him much lately, but I definitely think this is a game where we could see him, hit the 300-yard mark, 3 touchdowns. He's got major rushing upside that people don't recognize for whatever reason, but he's over 400 rushing yards on the season, 7 touchdowns. Definitely kind of lifts his floor/ceiling combination quite a bit. So definitely don't want to ignore him. I know the price is scary, but he can pay it off. And then, Phil Maffa, he's probably at this point, he's about where he should be priced. And I don't know. In fact, I do know this matchup against SMU is not great. Saw against South Carolina, 20 carries for 66 yards. Earlier in the season, he was just punching in these touchdowns and getting there that way. Then the middle part of the season, he was getting those big yardage games. He's kind of struggled the last 3, and I just don't know that he suddenly works his way out against a good defense like this in SMU. So I'm not too high on him. I wouldn't be too sad if he ends up being chalk like he's been over the this course of the season, but I don't think he will be. And then when we get to the receivers for Clemson, this is where it gets very, very interesting. Antonio Williams is there. Made the comment back in week 10, this guy just scores touchdowns, never gets big yardage. Rattled off 13 for 149 and 2 against Pittsburgh to flash that upside. It's relatively chalky that day too, unfortunately. Had a 5 for 72 and 2 game against the Citadel, and then 8 for 99 against South Carolina. No touchdown, but still a tough matchup. They lost that game for South Carolina. They deserve much more. But still a big performance by him. And now he's getting a much easier defense. So he has to be in consideration at the 6-4 price. I'd much rather pay down, but I have to just give the shout to Antonio Williams. You have Jake Brenningstool as the tight end, steady, whatever. But it's really the 2 freshmen that we've been really talking about all season long. Bryant Wesco, who's priced too cheap at 3.4. TJ Moore, who's at 3.1. Both of these guys, when there were injuries to other guys and Soletto was in and out all the time, Moore was out, Wesco went off, Wesco was out, Moore went off, and now they've just really solidified their roles. And these guys are going to be big stars next year. 6 for 65 last week for Moore against a tough South Carolina defense. He's the secondary option for me, very cheap, GBP-esque. But Bryant Wesco to me is going to be the star of this team next year when Antonio Williams gone. Moore will be just as good as well, but I think Wesco is going to give us a lot more fantasy relevant games. 5 for 67 last week. He had the 3 for 75 and a touchdown against Citadel. 3 for 61 against Pittsburgh after the 1-2 game injury thing that happened to him. He's been very good. Klubnik looks his way. He's just a big play threat. 36, 55, 45-yard catches over the last 3 weeks. He has a catch of 76 yards back in week 2, 70-yard touchdown against Stanford in week 5. This dude just finds a way behind the defenses, and SMU is just not going to be equipped to stop all of these options. I think we see 40 to 50 pass attempts from Klubnik at worst. That's going to be a lot of volume for the likes of Wesco, Moore, Williams, and a little bit of Brenningstool there. So Clemson passing game for sure. There'll be some questions about maybe multiple Clemson wide receivers potentially, but I think Wesco is looking like the main guy for me. And then I'll go with the traditional running back on the other side with Brashad Smith. lucky for us, it's not lucky, but I should say we don't have to worry as much as we had to in the past with SMU. We know Kamar Wheaton's been out since the beginning. Jalen Knighton's been out for a long time. Their RB4, Zane Myers is now ailing. Like, they only have LJ Johnson to really back up or take carries from Brashard Smith, and that's just not really happening. LJ's involved, but he's not taking enough work away from Brashard that we have to be any kind of nervous. And I think that 8-2 price is a little advantageous this week, considering the context of the rest of the slate. So that is where we're at on that one. But it's a stackable game for sure. Do you have anyone in there that I didn't mention, or anyone that you have an affinity for?
I think Wesco, man. It feels like kind of well, obviously way too cheap of a price, and a spot where maybe they try to take away Williams a little bit and freeze up Wesco for some stuff over the top. So I think we have some potential there, and definitely a lot of room to profit at the price.
Awesome. All right, then we'll take it to the last game here, Big Ten title game between Penn State and Oregon. It's a 3.5-point spread for Oregon right now, a total of 50. I'm on the Penn State plus 3.5 side. The betting Discord, there's a couple of Oregon grads there, so they didn't like that too much. We were having some fun, but yeah, I like this game a lot. This is a solid bet, I think, in Penn State, because I'm just not believing in Oregon, but they are undefeated, so they got that going for them. Maybe they can finish this dream season. Another team first year in their conference showing out. What do you think about this one?
Ooh, so yeah, how much do we put stock into Oregon beating Ohio State in the fashion that they did, it being such a close game, and then Ohio State eventually losing to Michigan? Who else has Oregon really played, right? And so it's going to be an interesting one. Another not a body clock thing, but this is a much more physical matchup than Oregon is kind of been tested by, and I think Penn State probably starts pretty hot in this one, gets the ground game going a little bit. Singleton primarily, a little bit of Kachon. Sure, why not? Little bit of Tyler Warren in the run game too. Can't get enough Tyler Warren. If you can get up to 7,700, I like him as a play. Obviously, he doesn't really have position anymore. He's just an athlete that does everything. So yeah, he's definitely a priority if you can get there. He's also the most expensive receiver on the slate, so not shocking anybody with him. Don't necessarily want to take either of the Penn State running backs. Definitely don't want Drew Aller. As far as the other Penn State pass catchers go, Harrison Wallace banged up a little bit, or at least not didn't play against Maryland. So I don't know what's going on there exactly. It opened up an opportunity for Omari Evans, and that's an interesting one because of all the attention that Warren and the run game will get. There's going to be an opportunity to take some shots, and Omari Evans has the ability to get downfield, take the top off of a defense, and not have a lot of attention his way. The issue is it's mainly Drew Aller that's going to be throwing it to him. So are they going to be able to connect when they do that? Maybe it's Tyler Warren throwing it to him, and maybe I'd feel a little bit better about that. But interesting play. It's a little bit thin. It's not as I don't feel as good as I do about Wesco or anything like that. But if you want an under the radar, off the wall, low owned guy that could hit a long play for a touchdown, I see Omari Evans kind of being that guy in this one. On the Oregon side, Dylan Gabriel has been at like the 9.1 to 9.8 range all year, and so we've kind of backed off of trying to jam Dylan Gabriel. At least I have. At 8.6, it's kind of starting to be interesting. Lot of other guys that we want to get to at quarterback. Not going to take away from that, but pretty low price point for a guy who's, when they have to keep the foot on the gas, he is the offense. They handed it off a ton last week against Washington, as I'm sure you're acutely aware of, and they're not going to be able to do that. Like they're not going to just be able to get 7 yards of carry against Penn State. You're going to have to sling it a little bit, and so I kind of like Dylan Gabriel in that spot where he's got to do a little bit more. He hasn't been pushed to really be the entire offense, and he hasn't been forced to win a game other than against Ohio State, and so like him in this one. Question becomes, who do you pair him with, right? And he is, he can run a little bit, and maybe we see a rushing touchdown or two out of him in this one. That'd be great, but I don't want to count on it. So do you trust that his high volume guy, Tez Johnson, who's been kind of the man throughout the season, is going to return to form? Obviously lackluster performances because he hasn't really needed to do much against Michigan and Washington, but he also didn't need to do much against Illinois. He didn't need to do much against Purdue. He didn't need to do much against Michigan State, and they did connect quite a few times in those games, and he's piled up 9 touchdowns over the season. So in this kind of game where it all does matter, I do think that connection does pretty well. And so if you have a lot of cheapies in other places and can get to a Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, and Tyler Warren ping pong back and forth kind of scenario, you're getting a lot of fantasy points and a lot of concentration from those guys. Evan Stewart is kind of the obvious go-to if you're not paying up for Tez Johnson. 3,900, he's a great play as well. Certainly an option for Gabriel stacks if you don't want to get to Tez Johnson. The other option is to use 2 non-Tez Johnson receivers. So you could go Stewart and Trayshawn Holden, Stewart and Terrence Ferguson, who has had the most volume of a guy who I kind of think of as a touchdown dependent kind of guy. He's actually had a pretty good amount of volume too. And he's only had 2 touchdowns. So it's kind of good that he's had the volume because he has not been reliable or as reliable as with the touchdowns as in years past. So if you wanted the really cheap version of Dylan Gabriel, it would be Dylan Gabriel, Evan Stewart, and Terrence Ferguson. And then if you did the Omari Evans comeback, that would be the really cheap way to stack up this game completely. And there's also a really expensive way to do it. So I'm comfortable with any and all of those builds, mixing and matching any of those pieces. I don't really like either side for the running backs. I was all about Jordan James last week because of the game flow. Worked out pretty well. Would have loved to see him get over the 100-yard bonus. Didn't quite get there, 99 yards. That always kind of sticks with you when a guy gets to 99 yards, but is what it is. But I just like the passing game quite a bit better in this one. I think that's how they tend to approach it and will have more success doing so. So really, Oregon passing game, pass catchers from Penn State, all of it is good and can be useful.
So that brings us to what kind of core you're looking at for that Saturday slate.
Yeah. So going just Saturday, let's go with, and let's be realistic about, not just jamming in all the expensive guys. I'm going to go Braylon Braxton at quarterback. I'm going to go Wisner at running back, and I'm going to go with Jaden Higgins at receiver.
Dig it. For me, I'm gonna be Parker Navarro because I'm just not able to get away from him. At running back, Brashad Smith, I think is my favorite. I mean, obviously Scat the top, but I think Brashad Smith is my favorite running back considering matchup and all these other elements. And then at wide receiver, going with these cheapies, big surprise. But Bryant Wesco and or TJ Moore, one of them probably going to be Wesco. He's been one of my favorites. It was the first one I noticed before he got hurt, TJ Moore. And I think that allows us to do some serious damage there. All right, let's hop over to some props, some prize picks and underdog stuff. Have three in particular I want to talk about right now on PrizePicks, and we'll kick over to you. 2 rushing attempt ones. So Quentin Wisner over 17.5 rushing attempts. We saw 33 and 26, so if that continues, that 17.5 is way too low. Trey Stewart over 22.5 rush attempts. I don't remember them giving us rush attempts very often this year, but maybe I just missed it. He was at only 20 last week, 22 a couple of weeks ago, but typically you're going to see him at 25 plus. So I'm comfortable, especially with the injury stuff going on with Huff. And then Tyler Warren over 0.5 touchdowns. It has to be a rushing and or receiving touchdown, but I would expect him to score at least once. If it was a passing touchdown included in that too, I would be really happy with that number. But 0.5 touchdowns, he's going to score. Come on. So those are 3 of my favorites on PrizePicks. What do you got?
So I'm going to go with Jonty. He's got the I always get it confused. The demon, right? Demon's the red one. Yeah, the red one. Got the demon for over 2.5 rushing plus receiving touchdowns. So we're gonna get 3 touchdowns out of him. We're gonna win that demon. Exercise those demons, right? And then we're gonna go with Scat for over 120.5 rushing yards. I think with Tyson out, they are probably going to ride Scat pretty heavily and get some chunk plays that way. And then we're going to stick with the rushing yards and go Wiesner with over 85.5 rushing yards.
Love it. Then there's 2 on Underdog that I like quite a bit. Coleman Owen over 46.5 receiving yards playing against Miami of Ohio. But, I mean, geez, the guy could catch one for 50. And then Hajj Malik Williams over 60.5 rushing yards. Got to have that rushing success there against Boise State. Keep the ball away from Ashton Genty if they can. So those are 2 on Underdog that I like. We'll have more in the track, or we don't have a tracker for that anymore, but in the Discord and in the article that is going to release. I think that pretty much takes us to the end here. Conference Championship week. Again, we have the Army-Navy stuff we'll definitely be having content for, and then we'll be diving into bowl stuff. We'll figure out a show schedule around the bowl games. Don't know what that's going to be quite yet. But before we get out of here, Conference Championship week slate breaker a la Jake Kucheck, who is riding high from Shedeur Sanders. Let's get it 2 for 2, 2 and 2 in 2 weeks. I mean, let's hear this week's slate breaker and their stat line.
All right. So, not any state secrets here that this guy's got talent, but I think will probably be under-owned given the price tag on him. So we're going to go with Jaden Higgins for 12 catches, 175 yards, and 2 touchdowns in a massive game against Arizona State. It's a back-and-forth battle.
Should be a fun one. 2 teams that nobody expected. Appreciate everybody who tuned in live and or demand, depending when you're watching this. All season long, you guys have supported us a ton. So I'll ask you once again to please hit that like button if you're watching on YouTube and or Twitter/X. All of those interactions, likes, and reposts help us so much. You guys have been awesome. Still figuring out the show schedule again for bowl season. So this isn't the last Super Show of the season just yet, but we're getting close. Thanks very much, guys. We're going to continue our run. And in the Discord, you can count on us to have lots of tilting and all kinds of green screens and window trips in our future. Appreciate everybody. See you guys next time.